There is something quietly powerful about a woman who no longer negotiates with her peace. And most people assume respect is earned through effort, doing more, giving more, explaining more. But in truth, the deepest form of respect arises not from what you do for others, but from the energy you carry when you no longer betray yourself to be understood. In relationships, men are not only observing your words, they are feeling your internal alignment. They're drawn to your stillness or repelled by your chaos, often without knowing why. That's not magic, it's biology, it's energetic resonance. In this talk, I invite you into a deeper understanding of how applying 4 timeless principles not only changes the way men respond to you, but reshapes your entire experience of love, communication, and inner balance. Because when your inner world becomes clear, your outer relationships follow. Welcome to Self-Mastery, your space for real wisdom and inner growth. Subscribe and remember name of our YouTube channel, Self-Mastery, because others may copy the voice, but the truth lives here. Let us begin. There is a silent kind of power that doesn't demand attention, doesn't seek to be understood immediately, and doesn't act out to be seen. This power reveals itself in a woman who no longer reacts impulsively to the world around her, but instead responds from a place of deep inner calm. This emotional stillness is not apathy. It is not suppression. It is the result of training the mind to observe rather than explode, to feel without being consumed, to experience emotion but not be ruled by it. It is a kind of grace that arises when the storm within is no longer fighting itself. Imagine 2 women standing in a room where tension is rising, perhaps in a relationship conflict. One raises her voice, her hands fly into the air, her breath quickens, and her words spill out like fire. She is not wrong in how she feels, but the emotion has taken full control. The other remains still, not cold, not withdrawn, but composed. She listens not to reply, but to understand. Her eyes do not wander. Her tone is steady. She speaks slowly, deliberately, with presence, which one commands more respect, not fear, not intimidation, but genuine, heart, deep respect. Emotional stillness is a mark of self-leadership. It shows that a woman is not at the mercy of what others do, say, or expect. She has become the gatekeeper of her inner world. And men, especially those who live in a world of constant challenge, silently admire this. Why? Because it is rare, because it is beautiful, and because it gives them something to trust. In neuroscience, the amygdala is responsible for processing emotional reactions, especially fear and threat. When overactivated, it leads to impulsive decisions, reactive speech, and emotional volatility. But when the prefrontal cortex, our rational, wise mind, is in control, responses become calm, thoughtful, and anchored. Emotional stillness isn't the absence of feeling. It's the result of integrated brain function. A woman who takes the time to breathe before reacting, to pause before speaking, to reflect before deciding, she is literally rewiring her brain toward mastery. There is a story of an elderly woman who lived in a mountain village. She was known for never raising her voice, never speaking ill of others, and never rushing through her words. One day, a traveler came through the village and was struck by her presence. He asked her, "How have you learned to be so calm in a world that is so loud?" She smiled and said, "I used to be loud too, until I realized I was only echoing the noise around me. Now, I wait until my heart is quiet enough to hear what matters." In relationships, this type of inner silence creates emotional safety. A man may not consciously understand it, but when he feels it, he trusts it. He knows that in her presence, there is no need to perform or pretend. He can also be real. This space, a space of non-reactivity, becomes the ground for authentic connection, not performative love, not surface-level validation, but truth, It's important to remember that emotional stillness doesn't mean suppression. Many women have grown up in cultures that encourage silence but not stillness. Suppression leads to resentment. Stillness leads to wisdom. The difference is in the intention. Suppression says, I'm not allowed to feel this. Stillness says, I choose to feel this fully, but not act from it blindly. One of the most misunderstood concepts in emotional intelligence is the idea that expression must be immediate. But expression that isn't aligned with clarity often causes damage. A woman who feels disrespected but waits to speak until her words reflect her strength, not her hurt, is not weak. She is wise. She has learned that her energy is precious and that not all conversations deserve her full fire. Men respond differently to women who lead with emotional reactivity versus those who embody emotional clarity. Reactivity invites defensiveness. Clarity invites reflection. When a woman can say, "This upset me, but I want to understand it before I project it," she steps into a rare kind of maturity, and that maturity is magnetic. In traditional Eastern practices, the cultivation of emotional stillness is often linked with breath. Inhale, observe. Exhale, release. When we slow our breath, our nervous system calms. And when our nervous system calms, our words are no longer weapons. They become instruments of healing. This is why emotional stillness is not just a technique. It is a spiritual discipline. It transforms not only how we feel, but how we love. Now let's move deeper. There is a second principle that, when applied, completely shifts how others relate to us: boundaries. A woman without boundaries is like a river without banks. She loses form. She spills everywhere. She gives too much. She explains too much. She apologizes for simply existing. And over time, she becomes exhausted not because others took too much, but because she forgot to guard her own gates. Boundaries are not punishments. They are invitations. They tell the world, this is how I deserve to be treated. This is the level of consciousness I operate from. And if you wish to engage with me, rise to meet it. There is a powerful psychological principle called self-other differentiation. It means knowing where you end and someone else begins. In relationships, this is crucial. Without it, women merge with their partner's needs, lose themselves in the hope of being chosen, and confuse sacrifice with love. But love without self-respect becomes codependence. It becomes longing without grounding, and longing, when unmet, turns bitter. Men do not respect women who allow everything. Not because they are cruel, but because our brains are wired to respect what has value, and value is demonstrated through limits. When a woman says no with grace, she teaches others that she is not afraid of being misunderstood, that she will not betray herself to be accepted, that she walks with herself first. There is a well-known story about a teacher who invited his student to pour tea into a cup. The student kept pouring until the tea spilled over. The teacher said, "You are like this cup, so full of others that you have no space left for your own wisdom." In relationships, many women become that cup, overflowing with trying, overflowing with proving. But without boundaries, the cup cracks, and nothing meaningful can stay. Boundaries teach others how to access your energy. They say, "You may not raise your voice at me. You may not enter my space uninvited. You may not ask for intimacy without presence. You may not delay your healing at the cost of mine." But here is the challenge. Many women fear that if they set boundaries, they will lose love. But the love that dissolves in the face of boundaries was not love. It was control, dressed up as connection. Real love respects boundaries because it respects personhood. In psychology, assertiveness is one of the healthiest communication styles. Not aggressive, not passive, assertive. It says, "I matter. You matter, but I am responsible for protecting my peace, and in doing so, it builds bridges, not walls." Women who communicate boundaries early on don't waste time in relationships where there is no mutual respect. They don't keep explaining the same need. They don't chase apologies that never come, because their inner world is no longer for sale. There is a woman named Amina who spent years in relationships where she said yes when she meant no. She feared abandonment more than she feared self-betrayal, until one day something shifted. She looked at herself in the mirror and whispered, "I miss myself." That moment was the beginning of her return. She began setting small boundaries, starting with her time, her phone, her energy. At first, people resisted, but then something remarkable happened. She began attracting people who honored her no as much as they celebrated her yes. And that is the truth about boundaries. They do not push away love. They refine it. They filter out the noise, the manipulation, the performance. What is left is clear, intentional, and clean. It doesn't pull. It flows. This energetic cleanliness is what men who are rooted in strength gravitate toward. Not chaos, not drama, but order. A woman who holds her line gently, but firmly sends a silent message. I will not shrink to be loved. I will expand and love from that fullness. You see, boundaries are not just for others. They are for you. They are how you remain in integrity with yourself. When you abandon your own limits, your soul becomes restless. When you honor them, peace returns. And peace, unlike excitement or infatuation, lasts. These two qualities, emotional stillness and clear boundaries, form the bedrock of a woman's sacred presence. One keeps her centered in the storm. The other protects her from drowning in it. Together, they transform her from someone who is constantly reacting to the world into someone who shapes the world through her inner clarity. And when a woman walks this path, she no longer needs to be loud to be heard, aggressive to be respected, or agreeable to be loved. She becomes the living example of self-respect. And in that presence, men cannot help but pause, soften, and rise. There is a strength that makes no noise. It doesn't argue. It doesn't prove. It doesn't interrupt or seek validation. It simply is, present, grounded, and unshakable. This kind of strength is often misunderstood in a world that confuses loudness with power. But there is a quiet power in a woman who no longer needs to explain herself to be understood. Her presence alone carries a language that speaks louder than words. It's not what she says. It's how she is when she walks into a room, when she listens, when she responds with composure rather than chaos. It is the kind of presence that causes others to slow down, to recalibrate, to listen more closely, not out of fear, but out of reverence. This silent strength is often cultivated over time, usually through trials, through emotional pruning, through seasons of solitude. It comes from doing the deep inner work of healing and of returning to oneself. And what's most remarkable is that men, whether they admit it or not, sense this kind of strength instantly. There is something deeply attractive, even disarming, about a woman who is not ruled by desperation or performance. She's not trying to win him over with charm, nor is she playing the role of someone she thinks she should be. She is simply aligned with herself, with her truth, with her values. There's a story of a woman named Celine who worked in a highly competitive environment. Her colleagues were constantly fighting for recognition, talking over one another in meetings and chasing validation through every means possible. But Celine was different. She spoke rarely, but when she did, her words carried weight. She didn't try to match the volume of the room. She brought a kind of calm that made the room quiet itself. Over time, people began to seek her advice, not because she was the loudest, but because her presence made others feel safe. She wasn't reactive, and she didn't need to impress. She embodied clarity, and in her personal life, this same energy translated to relationships, She didn't chase attention. She didn't compete. She simply carried herself in a way that said, I know who I am, and I trust that those meant for me will recognize it. This is the essence of silent strength. It's the opposite of attention seeking. In psychological terms, this kind of energy creates what is known as emotional security, an invisible yet powerful force that influences how people respond to you. It's not about manipulation. It's about congruence. When your inner world is settled, your outer presence becomes magnetic. You stop needing to prove your worth because your stillness reveals it. And here's something even more profound. When a woman no longer needs to be chosen, she becomes irresistible because she's already chosen herself. Her self-worth is not up for negotiation. And everything changed. Her partner began listening, not defensively, but openly, because now her communication was purposeful. It was rooted in respect for herself and for the relationship. This type of communication also protects the feminine energy. When a woman stops using her voice to seek approval or defend herself unnecessarily, she preserves her softness. She doesn't waste her energy trying to be understood by those unwilling to understand. Instead, she learns to speak only when her voice adds value, not noise. And what's even more powerful is that when she does speak, people listen, not because she demands attention, but because she commands it. Through intention, through restraint, through self-awareness. She doesn't speak to fill the silence. She speaks to transform it. The science behind this can be found in how the brain processes verbal versus non-verbal cues. Studies have shown that up to 93% of communication is non-verbal. This means tone, posture, timing, and energy speak louder than words. So when a woman aligns her words with her presence, she becomes unforgettable. Her yes means yes. Her no means no. And her silence doesn't create confusion. It creates curiosity. Purposeful communication is also about discernment. Not every emotion needs to be shared in real time. Not every conflict needs immediate resolution. Sometimes the wisest thing a woman can do is to pause, reflect, and then choose the time and place where her truth will be received, not resisted. That doesn't make her manipulative. It makes her strategic, and strategy, when combined with sincerity, is powerful. This level of self-mastery in communication turns relationship conflict into growth, not war. It shifts the dynamic from reaction to reflection, from accusation to inquiry, from defensiveness to dialogue. And in doing so, it creates a space where both partners can rise, not shrink. When a man experiences this kind of communication, something within him shifts. He feels respected, not controlled. He feels invited, not interrogated. And as a result, his natural response is to meet her with the same level of presence, to honor her clarity with his attention, to match her stillness with his strength. But none of this is possible without the inner work, without cultivating silent strength, without healing the parts of oneself that believe noise equals power, or that being understood is a requirement for being at peace. True power lies in being so rooted in self that others feel your clarity before you speak a word. And when you do speak, your voice does not seek to convince. It simply reveals. There is something quietly sacred about the way energy moves through a person, how it speaks before words are formed, how it's sensed even in silence. You may not see it with your eyes, but you feel it in someone's presence. And in relationships, this energy becomes the invisible thread that either nurtures connection or slowly erodes it. What few people realize is that every moment we are broadcasting who we are, not through what we say, but through what we embody. This is the essence of energetic hygiene, protecting, cultivating, and aligning the unseen parts of you so that what you invite into your life, especially in love, reflects what's clean, strong, and rooted within. The world often teaches women to focus on their appearance, their words, their achievements. But what truly shifts a relationship dynamic isn't external. It's the energy she walks in with. A woman who has mastered her emotional field becomes magnetic, not because she's trying to be, but because there's no residue of desperation or chaos in her aura. She doesn't pull or chase. She draws things in naturally through stillness, through coherence, through a deep connection with her own essence. Men may not know how to articulate it, but they feel it. They feel when a woman is whole. They feel when her energy is light and uncluttered, when she's not carrying bitterness from old betrayals or insecurity wrapped in performance, and they respect it deeply. In neuroscience, this energetic awareness connects with what is called affective empathy, our ability to feel what another person is feeling, not because of what they say, but because our nervous systems begin to synchronize. When two people interact, especially in close relationships, their emotional states are mirrored. This is why being around someone who is anxious, bitter, or reactive can leave you feeling drained, even if the conversation was polite. It is not about surface appearances, it's about energetic transmission. Now, consider a woman who is intentional about her emotional state. She wakes up and doesn't scroll through chaos. She guards her thoughts. She checks in with her heart before responding to messages. She listens to her body, noticing where it holds tension and releases it. She chooses her circle wisely. She distances herself from gossip, from drama, from people who trade in confusion and instability. She's not living in avoidance. She's practicing stewardship. Her energy is no longer a public highway. It's a sanctuary. There's a story of a healer in a remote village who was known for her ability to bring people into balance just by being near them. A traveler came and asked, "What do you do to heal them?" She replied, "I don't heal them. I keep my own energy clean, and their hearts remember what alignment feels like." In relationships, this is the kind of presence that becomes unforgettable, not because she demands to be remembered, but because she brings others back to their own truth. Energetic hygiene then becomes a relational tool. A woman who is clean in her energy doesn't need to test a man, manipulate him, or control him. She simply observes what his presence does to hers. If it disrupts her peace, she doesn't retaliate, she redirects. If it dishonors her value, she doesn't explain, she exits. Her energy becomes her compass. It tells her what aligns and what does not. And because she honors that compass, she doesn't settle for chaos dressed as passion or control masquerading as love. This clarity is what allows her to discern. She can tell the difference between a man who is present and one who is just performing presence. She can feel when the energy is reciprocal versus when it is one-sided. And because she no longer needs to beg for breadcrumbs, she moves from a space of sovereignty, not scarcity. In practical terms, this means she protects her emotional environment like she would her home. She doesn't leave the door open to just anyone. She doesn't entertain conversations that drain her. She doesn't tolerate energy that feels anxious, manipulative, or invasive. She knows that every interaction, every exchange is an invitation to either expand or contract, and she's no longer willing to shrink. There's a woman named Leela who, after years of entering relationships that left her depleted, began a simple practice. Each night, she would sit in silence and ask herself one question: where did I leak energy today? At first, it was conversations with friends who only called to complain. Then it was checking her phone too early in the morning. Later, she realized it was entertaining a man who gave her just enough attention to stay, but not enough to feel seen. Slowly, she began sealing those leaks. She started her days with stillness. She stopped responding out of guilt. She let go of people who loved her conditionally, and something remarkable happened. She began attracting people who respected her time, her presence, and her boundaries. Not because she became someone new, but because she returned to who she was before the world taught her to abandon herself. This is the power of energetic hygiene. It is not about perfection. It is about presence, about cultivating an emotional atmosphere within yourself that is calm, clear, and compassionate. And from that atmosphere, you create relational standards not by force, but by frequency. Men who are grounded in themselves respond differently to this kind of energy. They don't feel the need to dominate it. They want to protect it, to match it, because it reveals to them a version of peace they may have forgotten. And in this peace, something deeper than attraction forms: reverence. A sense that being near this woman makes them want to rise, not retreat. To be honest, not impressive. To grow, not perform. But let us also speak truthfully. Protecting your energy in relationships can feel lonely at first. When you start saying no to what you once tolerated, when you stop reaching out to people who never met you halfway, when you remove yourself from conversations that lack depth, there will be a silence. But in that silence, you will hear your own voice again. In that space, you will feel your own energy again, pure, unfragmented, whole. It's in this space that your self-worth recalibrates. You realize you don't have to be constantly available to be valuable. You don't have to give unlimited access to be loved. You don't have to entertain shallow connections just to avoid solitude. Your energy becomes your message, and the people who resonate with that message will find you. Not because you were loud, but because your energy spoke louder than any words ever could. This principle also applies to romantic dynamics, where confusion often reigns. When a woman is attuned to her energy, she can feel when someone's presence disrupts her alignment. She doesn't need to analyze a man's words endlessly. She observes how her body responds in his presence. Does she feel anxious or calm? Does she feel small or seen? This intelligence, the intelligence of the nervous system, is more trustworthy than any surface-level performance. And so, she no longer engages in the exhausting rituals of overthinking, over-explaining, or over-giving. She simply observes. She lets the energy speak. And if the energy is inconsistent, unclear, or unsafe, she honors that. She doesn't wait for proof when the truth is already in the vibration. Some may call this cold, but it is not coldness. It is clarity. It is refusing to override your own intuition just to maintain a connection that depletes you. It is refusing to carry someone else's emotional chaos on your back while abandoning your own stability. It is choosing yourself, not in a selfish way, but in a sacred way. And in doing so, she becomes rare. Because while many women are taught to be accommodating, agreeable, and always available, few are taught the power of protecting their energy as a form of self-respect. Fewer still are taught that men, real men, are not threatened by this power. They are drawn to it. There's an ancient saying that goes, when the soul is clean, the path becomes clear. The same applies in relationships. When your energy is clean, your choices become obvious. You don't need to ask whether someone respects you. You feel it. You don't need to wonder if the connection is mutual. You sense it. And if it's not, you don't take it personally. You bless it, release it, and return to your center. And this center becomes your home. A place within that no one can take from you. Because it wasn't built by external validation. It was built through devotion. Devotion to peace, to truth, to alignment. And when you live from this place, everything you attract into your life must pass through a new kind of filter, the filter of self-respect, of clarity, of clean energy. This is what transforms relationships from places of performance into places of presence, from dynamics of power into dynamics of partnership, and from moments of intensity into journeys of depth, because in the end, your energy is not just yours. It is your offering to the world, and the more you protect it, the more sacred your relationships become. There is a silent power in the woman who no longer allows her emotions to hijack her responses. A woman who learns to regulate her emotional temperature is not suppressing her humanity. She is simply refusing to let her temporary storms determine the climate of her relationships. In the world we live in, emotional reactivity is often normalized, even glorified. People say she speaks her mind, or at least she's honest, as if outbursts were signs of strength. But true power, true influence comes from a deeper place. The ability to remain still when chaos is loud, to breathe when provoked, to observe instead of react. This is not emotional numbness. This is emotional wisdom. When a woman steps into this space, something changes. The energy she brings into the room feels grounded, anchored. Not because she doesn't feel deeply, but because she no longer lets every feeling dictate her reality. And in the presence of such a woman, men feel both challenged and comforted. They respect her not because she demands it, but because she embodies it. Let us look deeper into the mechanism that gives this presence its power. Neuroscience tells us that the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain responsible for decision making and impulse control, has a direct relationship with the amygdala, the center of our emotional reactions. When a person is emotionally triggered, the amygdala becomes hyperactive, overriding rational thought. But individuals who consistently practice self-regulation build stronger neural pathways from the prefrontal cortex to the amygdala. This means they are literally rewiring their brains to respond instead of react. So when a woman trains herself not to lash out when disappointed, not to become sarcastic when insecure, not to blame when afraid, she's not just controlling herself, she is transforming herself. The regulation of her emotions becomes the refinement of her character. Men watch this closely, though they may not always articulate it. Whether in romantic relationships or friendships, a woman who responds with calm presence, especially during conflict, invites a higher level of interaction. She sends a signal. This space is safe, even when I'm hurt. I will not burn this bridge because I feel a temporary heat. I will speak, not scream. I will express, not explode. Consider this story. A man once said of his wife, "She's my home, not my battlefield." When asked why, he explained, "I've made mistakes. I failed her. But she never used her emotions as a weapon. She never humiliated me. She never needed to. Her disappointment was real, her boundaries were firm, but she carried herself with such dignity. I couldn't help but grow in her presence." This isn't weakness. This is maturity forged in fire. In contrast, a woman who has not mastered her emotional energy may resort to volatility, manipulation, or passive aggression. She might accuse when clarity is needed, withdraw when closeness is required, or punish when honesty is called for. In doing so, she may achieve momentary power, but she loses long-term respect. The relationship becomes a playground for insecurity rather than a sanctuary for growth. Respect, after all, is never about fear. It's about trust. Emotional regulation creates safety, not safety in the sense of comfort alone, but in the sense of predictability. A man who knows that his woman can be trusted with his vulnerable truths, even when those truths are uncomfortable, is far more likely to open himself. And when a man opens himself, truly and fully, his loyalty follows, not just out of obligation, but out of awe. He sees in her something rare, restraint with power, stillness with strength, gentleness with fire. There's a quote that reads, "A woman who can control her emotions can control almost anything." Why? Because emotional control is at the root of decision making communication, conflict resolution, and vision. It touches every part of life. If you can't regulate your emotions, you will sacrifice what you value most just to feel something in the moment. Now think of how this shows up in relationships. How many women sabotage their deepest connections because they feel disrespected and respond with insults? How many destroy trust because they feel afraid and choose to control? How many lose admiration because they choose drama over dignity? Let's not confuse honesty with recklessness. There's nothing wrong with expressing hurt. There's everything wrong with letting hurt turn you into someone you don't respect. One of the greatest misconceptions in emotional life is the belief that regulation means repression. That's not true. Emotional regulation isn't about pretending not to feel. It's about knowing when, how, and with whom to share what you feel. It's about processing emotions wisely and not turning them into weapons. For example, imagine a woman who feels jealousy rise within her when her partner talks to another woman. Instead of accusing, sulking, or causing a scene, she first breathes. She notices the feeling without becoming it. Later, in a calm and connected moment, she says, "When I saw that, I felt a little insecure. I know it's my feeling to own, but I also want to share it honestly." That is self-awareness. That is strength. That is emotional maturity. And what happens? The man listens. He doesn't feel blamed. He feels trusted. And when a man feels trusted, his instinct is to protect and honor that trust. The emotional space between two people becomes sacred not because it is always peaceful, but because it is protected from unnecessary destruction. You see, emotional regulation is spiritual hygiene. Just as we clean our bodies to prevent illness, we clean our hearts through presence, awareness, and discipline to prevent emotional pollution. A woman who neglects this will carry her unresolved emotions into every interaction. But a woman who honors this practice will bring clarity into every connection. In Eastern traditions, there is the concept of equanimity, a state of inner balance, untouched by external chaos. This state is not achieved by denying emotion, but by mastering the space between stimulus and response. In that space lies wisdom. So when a woman is deeply disrespected and chooses to disengage without demeaning, that is equanimity. When she is misunderstood and responds with clarity, not cruelty, that is equanimity. When she is disappointed but does not dramatize, that is equanimity. This state creates a gravitational pull. People are drawn to those who possess it, not because they are always agreeable, but because they are deeply dependable. They do not react to every wave. They move like the ocean itself, fast, quiet, powerful. In relationships, especially romantic ones, this trait becomes even more potent. Imagine a disagreement where the man is agitated, defensive, maybe even irrational. The emotionally regulated woman does not try to match his chaos. She pauses, she listens, and she speaks only when the storm inside her has passed. Her words then carry weight, not because they are loud, but because they are true. Eventually, the man calms down, not because she controlled him, but because her presence invited his nervous system to settle. This is known as co-regulation in psychology. A regulated nervous system can influence another. Her peace becomes a mirror for his. Her steadiness becomes his anchor. This is what deep respect is built on. Let's bring this into a practical frame. A woman can build this capacity through small, daily habits, morning silence, before engaging with the world, conscious breathing during stress, journaling instead of texting when upset, pausing before speaking when triggered. These are not just self-help tools. They are relational weapons of peace. In a world constantly pushing for reaction, she chooses reflection. This choice is hard. It takes practice. But it is the practice of power. And the more she walks this path, the more emotionally magnetic she becomes. She will find herself attracting men, not just romantically, but in all areas of life, who admire her composure. Colleagues who trust her leadership, friends who seek her counsel, children who feel safe around her. She becomes the calm in the middle of every storm. Not because she was born different, but because she trained differently. There was once a story of a woman who carried a small stone in her pocket. Every time she felt triggered, she'd place her hand over it. This became her moment of pause, her ritual of response. Years later, she gave the stone to her daughter and said, "This stone taught me how not to lose myself when others did." This is the kind of legacy a woman creates when she regulates her emotional temperature, not just peace in her relationships, but wisdom passed down through presence. It's important to say, none of this means a woman should tolerate abuse, manipulation, or emotional neglect. Regulation is not silence in the face of harm.